Hello, welcome to the Go for Ball podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life. As always, we're giving you your weekly look at the hot hitters, the cold hitters, who's trending up, who's trending down, who you want to play, and who you want to avoid. So, without further ado, we're going to start things off here at catcher. And no surprise here, Buster Posey starting to run away with it. It's been kind of a progression all season where he struggled at the beginning, got hot, and I mean, he's really just been absolutely on fire recently. And now one of three catchers with 14 home runs on the season, batting .318, walking 9.9% of the time, only striking out 8.8. I mean, this is the Buster Posey that we were expecting all season. He's finally here, and he's actually worth playing in your cash games sometimes now, unlike earlier in the season where it was GPP only.
Yeah, definitely. And there's been a decent amount of power at the catcher position this year. I mean, Posey, Vogt, Russell Martin all have 14 home runs. Perez and McCann both have 15. Norris has 11. I mean, it's been a pretty power-packed position for the most part. The problem is a lot of these guys aren't hitting for average. We only have just Posey above 300. Yadier Molina, who's really not worth playing because he doesn't give you much of anything else, is at 287. Vogt's at 282. Everyone else is 262 or below that's qualified. So it's become so much of a platoon position. But, I mean, you got the usual suspects at the top here. We mentioned Posey. Vogt's another one that I use a ton. Russell Martin. And then, as usual, McCann at home against a righty is always a solid play. I've been playing Derek Norris a little bit still, and he's just, I mean, he's okay. He just, isn't anything special right now, and he's playing in a Padres lineup that's just really been struggling. He's been decent on the year, but a .230 batting average just really isn't going to get the job done.
No, I mean, he's the guy you play because he's cheap and he's a filler and he gets good lineup spot, like you said, but that's about it. And then the thing with Sal Perez, he's one of those guys people like to play. Better throughout his career against lefties, but has actually been terrible this year against lefties.
Yep.
And, I mean, 1.8% walk rate. I mean, you know he's putting the ball in play for the most part. Strikeout rate of 14.9%, but I mean, this guy is not a patient hitter. He swings at everything, so that's not the type of hitter I like having in my cash games. He's a tournament option for me.
Right.
All right, moving over here to first base, where there's no changes at the top because Paul Goldschmidt. It was him and Anthony Rizzo and Miguel Cabrera there for a little while, but Cabrera obviously on the DL. You've got Anthony Rizzo really, really struggling right now. Goldschmidt running away with it right now. 344 average, 261 ISO, 17 steals, 21 homers, 73 RBIs. Goldschmidt, I mean, if it weren't for Bryce Harper, he'd be running away with the MVP in the NL, if you ask me. Just incredible numbers for him. He's your top option pretty much every night, and his price, FanDuel specifically, is down to a playable level now. I mean, he was mid 5Ks for a while. He's now down to around 4,700. So he's a guy you can actually consider in your cash games now. So it's nice to be able to get that kind of production in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with Cabrera out right now, Goldschmidt's become so much of a top play. I mean, we've seen Votto and Coors this weekend, so that's been nice. But outside of that, I mean, first base has cooled off quite a bit outside of some of these guys like Pujols, who's been really, really hot, but still only hitting 262 on the year. 29 home runs is pretty ridiculous, though. Yeah. I mean, lots of GPP plays at first base is basically what it is right now. Encarnacion's still only hitting 232, but has 19 home runs and 55 RBI. Chris Davis has 21 home runs and 55 RBI, and he's surprisingly hitting 241. I'm kind of, impressed that he's that high with how much of a free swinger he is. Yeah, right. I mean, striking out 31% of the time still. Another guy similar to that who's been much, much worse is Chris Carter, hitting 187 on the year with a 33% strikeout rate and 16 home runs. There's just a lot of GPP plays at first base, which is what makes playing GPPs in baseball so much fun. Jose Abreu is a guy that has continued to just float around in that just good enough area where he hasn't really been a cash game play. He hasn't really been a tournament play. I mean, 14 home runs on the season, solid. 287 batting average is solid, but I mean, he just hasn't been anything special. Only a 181 ISO, which I know isn't terrible, but when you're looking at the 9 guys above him in batting average and 8 of them have 200-plus ISOs, it's just not going to get the job done for what his price has been most of the year.
Yeah, and especially considering he hit 36 homers his rookie year, and he's just not – it just hasn't been what we expected. But like you mentioned with Pujols, I mean, he's having a great year, but he's got 222 on batting average on balls in play, which is insanity. So, and then, of course, Adam Lenz, whenever he's facing a righty, he's one of your better plays, but he's been priced like it recently, so he's been a tough guy to play also. And I'll mention one more. Lucas Duda, a guy everybody shies away from against lefties, but he actually has really significant splits. He's much better against lefties and much better at home. So keep that in mind next time you're considering Lucas Duda in your lineups. Second base is pretty much what it has been for the past couple weeks. Jason Kipnis up there at the top, right below D. Gordon in batting average, but D. Gordon obviously on the DL. He'll be coming back within a week or so. Kipnis, 63 runs scored, 11 steals. The guy's just pretty good at everything. Not great at any one category, but then below him, Jose Altuve up to 28 steals, 52 runs scored, 304 average. And then, of course, Brian Dozier. He's your power guy here. I mean, 20 homers on the season, 70 runs scored, 253 ISO, which is just astronomical for the middle infielder. So, especially against the lefty, I mean, he's a great play.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Dozier's probably my favorite play by far. He's got twice as many home runs as any other second baseman. That's qualified, I should say, at least, because I think Steven Drew's
I think he's
second in that department, but he's hitting about 130. So, but yeah, I mean, Dozier's by far my favorite play. 20 home runs, nine stolen bases. I mean, it's really hard to argue with him at any point in time. I mean, 256 batting average doesn't kill you when a guy has 70 runs scored. So, I mean, you can deal with him getting out more frequently than some of these other guys at the top. Howie Kendrick is a guy that I've been playing probably too much, considering the fact that he only has 7 home runs and 4 stolen bases. Only 44 runs scored and 40 RBI. He is hitting 291, but there isn't a ton of like fantasy upside there unless he has like a 3 for 4 kind of day. And I'm gonna probably try and work on playing him a little bit less. But they've been facing a lot of lefties lately, which has been getting him in my lineup. Another guy that I think is pretty similar to that has 43 runs scored, 10 home runs, 3 stolen bases. Danny Espinosa has been much cheaper. Obviously has a lower batting average, but I mean, for sometimes almost half the price, I like Espinosa quite a bit. And I mean, his batting average on balls in play has been pretty solid. If that remains, I think he's going to have a pretty nice rest of the season here. He has a lot more power than some of these other second basemen, and as I mentioned quite a bit on these podcasts, I like second basemen and shortstops that have power because it gives you a really solid advantage over the rest of the field.
Yeah, and speaking of a guy who's finally starting to show power, Robbie Cano.
Yeah,
he's up to 9 homers now. His overall numbers still don't look great, but 263 batting average, 137 ISO, 9 homers, 45 runs, 36 RBI. For a guy who started as badly as he did earlier this season, I mean, there's a chance this guy could still end up batting 280, 290 and turn this into a decent season. So while he's still pretty fairly priced, I mean, take advantage because he's not going to be, mid 3Ks for much longer the way that he's been hitting the ball. So definitely get yourself some Robbie Cano exposure before he's not worth the money anymore.
definitely.
All right, shortstop options now. You're looking at Troy Tulowitzki because he's finally starting to hit the ball again. His ISO's still lower than you'd like it to be, 177, but he's batting .313, got 12 homers and 52 RBI now. There were some rumors that people said they didn't think he was trying, so they thought he was going to get traded and blah, 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 and he's lazy, all these things. None of that really matters to me. If he's in a good matchup, I'm playing him because, I mean, especially at Coors against the lefty, he's just a great play, and he's finally starting to hit for power. Before, when he's just hitting .313, wasn't much different than a guy like Jose Iglesias or Xander Bogaerts who are up here who get hits but just don't have any power. And now, I mean, he's still not always worth his price tag, but I feel like he's been priced more fairly recently in the mid 4Ks rather than 5,000 plus on FanDuel and DraftKings. So when he's around that price, I don't mind playing him.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, he's still third at shortstop in WRC Plus at 117. I think it's only Johnny Peralta who has really been the best shortstop this season, even though his numbers are pretty close to Tulo's. He's been a little bit cheaper most of the time with 14 home runs, 48 RBI, hitting 296. And then the guy that I've been using quite a bit is Brandon Crawford. His biggest problem is that he hits so low in the lineup still, even against righties when he has good matchups and stuff, that it makes it tough. But he's got 59 RBI on the season now, 14 home runs. He's only hitting 266, but when you're leading shortstops in RBI, I mean, for sometimes what is the 16th, 17th most expensive shortstop on a slate, it's pretty hard to argue with there. A guy that I was playing a lot in the beginning of the season, Marcus Semien, has moved down to 9th in the batting order most nights. Not a guy you can target really heavily anymore. He does have 8 home runs and 9 steals, only hitting 256. I mean, these would be solid numbers if he was hitting 2nd in the lineup, even 6th in the lineup. But when he's hitting 9th, it's really tough when sometimes he's only getting 3, at best 4 at-bats in games. and he's not usually priced all the way near the minimum. That's what makes it tough to roster him. One guy that's been getting it going a little bit lately is Elvis Andrews for the Rangers with their whole offense. He's been hitting in the 6-7 spot, hitting 246. He's finally got his batting average on balls in play up to 276, where even that's a little low based on the 307 league average right now, but for such a fast guy, you'd like to see that increase even more. He does have 10 steals on the year, 33 runs, 33 RBI. I think he comes around a little bit more in the second half also.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then another interesting guy, Brad Miller, been batting leadoff a couple times. Got decent power for middle infielder, middle infielder, 154 ISO. He's got 8 homers and 10 stolen bases, but I mean, this is a guy that's still only batting 237. He's attempting cash game play because he's so cheap, but he's just not a guy that just gives you good at bats that often. So
right,
tough guy to roster. And then we've got to mention Starlin Castro. What a letdown he's been this year. .071 ISO, walking just 3.9% of the time, batting 239. He's been one of, if not the biggest fantasy disappointment at most positions so far this season.
Yeah, I mean, the Cubs tried so hard to get him to come around. They had him clean up for 6 straight weeks trying to break him out of his funk and get guys on base in front of him and stuff, and he just was not getting the job done. I mean, for how good the on-base percentages of Rizzo and Bryant were hitting in front of him, for him to only have 40 RBI right now from the cleanup spot for most of the year is pretty impressively bad, honestly.
Yeah. You saw a number the other day that the Cubs had the lowest home runs in the last 30 days, 10 total as a team. 10 home runs. So, I mean, they're a hard target right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the thing is they really don't have a ton of power. I mean, Bryant's probably their biggest power hitter, and even he hasn't been hitting a ton of home runs. So it's a team that they're trying to create as many runs as they can without home runs. And when you have guys like Castro hitting the middle of your order at 239, I mean, it's just tough to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And then as we look at shortstop options now, or I'm sorry, not shortstop, third base options now, Yunel Escobar continues to lead in batting average, 321. He's an okay cash game play when he's near minimum salary because he does bat, for some reason, third or fourth. He's not a guy with much upside. He's got 5 homers, 44 runs scored. He's an okay option, but this is a really bad Washington team right now. So for me, I don't target any of the hitters outside of Harper in tournaments right now because there's just such little upside with runs scored, RBIs, because no one's getting on base. But another interesting option right behind him, actually, is Manny Tomas up to 303. And he's an outfield-only option on FanDuel, but you can play him at third base on DraftKings. He hasn't really shown the power that we expected him to when he came up, but recently he's starting to show that power. So he's got a couple homers over the past week. But right behind him is the guy who's been priced like the best hitter, and he's been arguably the best hitter at third base over the past month or so. Manny Machado, great all-around numbers, 21 homers, 59 runs scored, 51 RBI, 14 steals, batting almost 300, ISO 236. He's also a hell of a defender, so I mean, not that you get any points for that, but Manny Machado's been having a great year.
Yeah, definitely. A couple other guys at third base having a great year. Machado, you mentioned, has 21 home runs. Donaldson has 23, hitting 292 with 60-plus RBI and runs scored. Nolan Arenado, 24 home runs, 72 RBI. Todd Frazier's having a fantastic season. We mentioned him and Votto have been in Coors all weekend. Frazier's got 26 home runs, 60-plus RBI, hitting 279-plus right now. He's been a really solid option, especially at home and against lefties. Another guy that's been having a pretty surprisingly good resurgence here is Kyle Seager, who was a guy you and I were playing early in the season. He was really struggling. I've been playing him a bunch lately, mostly in your recommendations, and he's been really, really hot. 15 home runs now, hitting 272. His batting average on balls in play is coming up as expected. He's up to 280 now. He's been red hot.
Yeah, and he's still really cheap. I mean,
yep.
I believe on FanDuel yesterday he was 2.7K, I think. So, I mean, just a crazy cheap price for a guy that's been really producing. And we saw it last year. Whenever he was at home against a righty, he was just the guy that you play. So, I mean, now this year, really starting to show that again. Another guy's really been struggling, Evan Longoria. I mean, he's having an okay year, but for what you're usually paying for him, he's not worth it. But his price, he's another one of those guys, much like Cano earlier this season, he's starting to creep down so low in price on FanDuel that he's pretty cash game playable at times because he's almost min salary, in the right matchup at least.
Yeah, and assuming he's healthy, which I haven't heard anything that he's really not healthy, he's going to have a hot streak like Cano's having right now at some point. So if you just keep playing him in good matchups, I mean, he's going to come around. He's not going to kill you. He's hitting 262, 9 home runs. I mean, nothing special, but a lot of it is the Rays' offense is terrible. They have no protection for him. They have nobody getting on base before him. I mean, it's just a tough spot. And then we'll mention him last, as we usually do. Luis Valbuena is only hitting 203. He's a good 40 points behind everyone else qualified in batting average, but he does have 19 home runs. Big power guy, strikes out quite a bit. Only 201 batting average on balls in play, which I think is about 50 points worse than everyone else that's qualified. So, I mean, he's popping up a ton, hitting a ton of fly balls. Obviously, 19 of them left the yard. Hitting in the cleanup spot for an Astros team that's been a little bit better offensively lately. He's just a really interesting guy this season.
Yeah, I mean, he's a fun guy to watch hit because you won't see anybody ever swing the bat harder than this guy swings.
Yeah.
So he's a frustrating guy to roster. I even saw when his price was down, people playing him in cash games. That's not something I can do, especially because, like you mentioned, gets under the ball a ton, pops it up, fly balls, weak fly balls, things like that. But definitely a great term option because he's got that double dong upside for sure. And then one more guy that I'll throw out there. Overall numbers still not very good, but starting to get it going a little bit recently. But still in an offense that's just not been consistent. David Freese, he's been right around minimum salary on FanDuel. He's been a nice punt play. Got 11 homers, 43 RBI on the season. ISO 158, 240 batting average. Still not great, but I mean, this is a guy who bats cleanup against lefties. He bats right around Pujols and Trout. So, in the right matchups, I think that he's a fine target in some options for you as well. All right, moving on here to the outfield, final position here. No surprise that up at the top you've got Trout and you've got Bryce Harper, both guys having just monster seasons. Trout kind of got off to a slow start this season. I mean, slow for Mike Trout, not slow for the average baseball player. But, I mean, we saw that surge that he's been having since right before the All-Star break, right ever since then. He's up to 28 homers, now past Bryce Harper. I believe at one point he was like 8 or 9 home runs behind him. But Trout now just absolutely crushing the ball. And the ISOs for these two guys are absolutely insane. 300 for Trout, 349 for Bryce Harper. So we can continue the Harper versus Trout argument probably for the rest of our lives. But both those guys, I mean, Trout, I think, a better cash game option most night. But both guys, I mean, just awesome GPP options against anyone.
Yeah, definitely. And those are definitely the top two guys. One guy that's having a really solid season that started out really hot, cooled off for quite a while. Lorenzo Cain is up to 314 batting average again, 10 home runs, 18 stolen bases, 58 runs scored now from the 3 spot in the Royals lineup. He's looked really good again, and he's a guy that's been crushing lefties. He's been a really fantastic GPP play in the right situations, even though his price is really high. Another guy in that same kind of situation, A.J. Pollock for the Diamondbacks, has similar type numbers, hitting 307. 11 home runs, 62 runs scored, 20 stolen bases. Really solid option also.
Yeah, and his price has actually gone down pretty far. I mean, his teammate David Peralta has been more expensive than he has on FanDuel for about a week or so now. So I think he's a much better player than Peralta. So I've been taking advantage of that. And some other guys, Charlie Blackmon, a guy that people only seem to play in cores. I still see a lot more Carlos Gonzalez than him in cash games, which obviously Gonzalez is cheaper, but Blackman's an incredible cash game play, especially when you're facing a righty. 292 batting average, 24 steals, 12 homers. I mean, 55 runs scored. The guy's got a 173 ISO. For a leadoff hitter, this guy has a ton of tools. So I love playing him, especially when he goes away from cores, when he's down near 4K on some sites. I mean, he still makes for a great cash game play. Flies under the radar. And then one of the Tigers' bats really starting to get going, Yoenis Cespedes. He's a guy that usually didn't bat for a lot or a really good average, usually just known as a power hitter, but up to 291 on the season now, ISO almost 200, 14 homers. He's the guy that's just been, ever since Miguel Cabrera went out, he and Ian Kinsler have both really just stepped up a lot and taken on some of that role for the Tigers.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see, there were a couple other guys I wanted to mention on here. You mentioned David Peralta. Not a particularly impressive guy. His batting average on balls and plays way over the league average right now. Still only hitting 272, 9 home runs, 4 stolen bases. Like you mentioned, Pollock's a much better player. So anytime he's priced cheaper, that's a steal. Yeah. Ryan Braun's had a really nice year. He's kind of stuck in that Pujols situation where his batting average is a little bit low, only 268. But Braun has 17 home runs, 56 runs scored, 60-plus RBI, 14 stolen bases has been pretty surprising also. He's just having a really solid year.
Yeah. There's one more guy I wanted to mention, actually, really similar numbers to Charlie Blackmon, but he doesn't seem like the same type of player. Starling Marte.
Yep.
19 stolen bases, 174 ISO, 291 batting average. He's got 13 home runs, especially against lefties. This guy absolutely destroys left-handed pitching. So another one of those guys where you see him fairly priced under 4K on FanDuel, maybe low 4Ks on DraftKings. He makes for an awesome cash game play because he's a guy that just does it all. And then mention a couple struggling guys real quick before we get out of here. We see Jock Peterson, 234 ISO, just batting 228, 20 home runs. He's been a guy he's just not been very good. I mean, his price, though, really, really cheap. I mean, he's under 3K on FanDuel, right around 3K on DraftKings. So he's been a guy who's been tempting to play in your cash games, but I've been trying to resist because he just hasn't been a very consistent hitter. But as long as that price keeps dropping, he's a tough guy to pass up in those situations. So.
Yeah, I mean, he's become like that Chris Davis in the outfield for me, where I could literally consider him every day that he's not facing a lefty as a GPP play, and I end up playing him a ton.
Yep.
And every once in a while he has a really nice game where he has a home run and a double and goes 2 for 4 with 2 strikeouts. And then every once in a while he has one of those really bad games where he strikes out 3 times and pops up once. So, I mean, he's a tough guy to play right now. Another guy that at the bottom here that's been struggling that I've been playing a ton is Shin-Soo Choo. Has been a big part of my Rangers stacks for the most part, and he's having a decent year in terms of 12 home runs, 40-plus RBI and runs scored. He's been pretty solid against righties, but only 234 batting average. Not a great guy, but he's been pretty solid and in good spots when he's in the right spot in the order. Another guy that's been finding his way into a ton of my GPP lineups, despite being towards the bottom here at 237, is Jose Bautista. 20 home runs, 60-plus runs and RBIs. I mean, obviously not a cash game play at 237, but a lot like Pujols, he only has a 226 batting average on balls in play. And, I mean, at some point that's going to come around a little bit. If he was hitting 245, 250 right now, I mean, he'd be one of the better plays on the board basically every night. And I think that's probably going to come around at some point, especially if he can get a little bit healthier. I know he's been struggling with some arm injuries and stuff like that throughout the year. So it should be pretty interesting to see what he can do in the second half of the season here.
Yeah, and you throw in the fact that he's walking almost 18% of the time. That's among the league leaders. So it seems like he's just not getting a whole lot of good pitches to hit. It seems like when he's having that unlucky batted ball, it's just he's just trying to make something happen out of nothing. So maybe people actually start throwing to him, but I know I wouldn't pitch to Jose Bautista.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty high up here in on-base percentage overall. I want to say he's like, top 10?
He probably
he's sixth in on-base percentage at 376. He's the only guy in the top 15 hitting below 279, it looks like. So, wow. I mean, like you mentioned, that's a massive walk rate. And not to mention the 263 ISO that I want to say is like only behind Harper and one other person. I'll check that right now.
I know Trout's 300. So
okay, he's 4th. He's behind Harper, Stanton, and Trout, even though Stanton's hurt right now. But, I mean, that's really, really solid.
Yeah, absolutely. So keep your eye on him. As we move forward, he's still a productive, everyday, regular player. But if he can start getting some more success, then maybe he'll be a even better DFS play for you. So find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out all the rest of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com. And we'll see you next time.